London for tonight's town hall. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, all of you, for being here tonight. It's great to be back in London, back at Western, for this exercise in democracy. I want to begin by thanking Chief Henry for his kind words, for welcoming us onto traditional territory of your people. As Kate said, no relationship is more important than the one we are building with Indigenous peoples across this country. There have been mistakes and terrible actions made by our country over the past generations and centuries, and it's a long journey of reconciliation we are on, but it is one that we walk together in respect and with tremendous hopefulness, and it's one that we couldn't be on if it was just about governments and Indigenous peoples. It's one that involves the support and the enthusiasm of non-Indigenous Canadians, like so many people in here. So thank you for the leadership each and every one of you show in making sure that how we move forward to be the country we know we need to be is anchored in respect and partnership with Indigenous peoples of this land. So thank you all. We come together tonight in an exercise in democracy. At its most fundamental, it's a chance to have a conversation about where our country is going, for you to ask questions of me and how I see the challenges we're facing and how we're trying to tackle them. But it's also about me learning from all of you what your concerns are, where your challenges are, where you think we need to be paying a little more attention or where we need to be doing more. Because ultimately, democracy and government and politics are just about how we decide as a society, as people, to build the future together. And the more the folks who have the honor of representing and serving you hear directly from you, hopefully the better job we do. So this is an exercise in dialogue, it's an exercise in respect. There will be many different views we hear tonight and different perspectives from people who are engaged enough, as Peter said, to stand out in the rain and come spend an evening talking about our future and our politics and our country. And as was also pointed out, the bonus tonight for me is that all my cabinet colleagues, the collected government of Canada, is here tonight to also hear your concerns. And there'll be many questions on many different areas. And we have experts in all those areas who will also be hearing what you're thinking about. And that's really, really important to me. And it's great that I have the whole cabinet here in London for a couple of days of work as we prepare the upcoming session, but also to connect with folks from here. Not going to get to all the questions. I'll try to get to as many as I can. I know this event was billed as talking about jobs and the economy, and yes, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about that because that's a fundamental concern for a lot of people. But of course, there was no screening done. There are no priorities in terms of what you have to ask or what you don't have to ask. I'm really looking forward to hearing your priorities and your questions. So without any further ado, let's just get into the conversation part. So I'm just going to go around the room, take some questions. We'll start with someone from this group here. How about you, Miss?
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your time. My question as a graduate student who is passionate about business and technology, I've also seen a rise in a movement towards gender equality. What can the federal government do to promote women's mobility in their careers in traditionally male-dominated industries?
Listen, that's a great question. And one that I can guarantee you, our Minister of Science, Kirsty Duncan, where are you, Kirsty? There she is hugely passionate about, as am I, getting more girls, particularly into STEM, into science, technology, engineering, and math, because we know that so many of the jobs and the economic opportunities and the growth of our society and communities in the future is going to rely more and more on technology, on understanding computers and science and math. So the more we can get women to succeed and pick these paths, but also the way we can work within the workforce to encourage promotion of women, advancement of women, opportunities for women in these areas, the better off we'll be. And one of the things that we're doing, and our Minister of Innovation, who's also here, Navdeep Bains, or who I believe was here, is launching an initiative around Girls Who Code. It's something that's a bit of a challenge for a federal government because we're not supposed to play too much in K-12 education because that's a provincial area of jurisdiction. But we've managed to move forward on supporting schools across the country, getting particularly girls in elementary and secondary school to get more involved in coding because it's going to be important. Equality is one of those things that is of fundamental importance to me and should be important to everyone. I'm a feminist. And everyone in this room should be a feminist too. And here's a simple test. Here's a simple test to see whether you are a feminist. If you think men and women should be equal and have equal opportunities, and if you think there's still more work to be done to make sure that that happens, guess what? You're a feminist. And we'll all work at it together. Because it's not just about doing the right thing on a moral level of including people. It's about also doing the smart thing. The more we get diverse views, the more we get different perspectives in various fields, in various organizations, whether it's a perspective of a woman, whether it's a perspective of diverse communities, the more we have heterogeneous organizations and groups trying to solve the challenges together, the better we get at actually solving those problems. So including everyone in our path forward is hugely important for me. So I thank you for your question. I thank you for your studies in science, and I encourage you and everyone to be supportive as we move forward. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Question from the back section there. Here we go. Yes, you, the young man in the red shirt.
Hi, my name is Pierce Philp. I am Prime Minister at St. Mark's School here in London.
Congratulations.
Thank you. This is my manager, Maya.
Oh, even I don't have a manager. That's great.
It's not always being Prime Minister. Oh, not easy being Prime Minister. What has been your biggest challenge being Prime Minister at Canada?
I guess one of the biggest challenges of my, I'll cheat and give two answers. One is the biggest challenge in my job. The other is the biggest challenge in my life. The biggest challenge in my job is working really, really hard to listen to and try and represent 36 million people who are hugely varied in their backgrounds, in their perspectives, in their outlook, in their stories, and in their desire to build a better future for themselves and the way they want to choose to do it. So the challenge anyone has in serving a country as great and diverse as this one is trying to find those common themes. And it's easy to look at Canada and see all the differences that characterize us, but it's also, once you get into it a little bit, easy to look at Canada and see all the ways in which we are similar, all the way our stories connect and meet, and how we draw from one another and learn from one another and our different perspectives to be better. So the challenge I always have and that I share with the amazing members of our cabinet is the opportunity to come together and figure out what the right path forward that's going to include as many people as possible, whether or not they voted for us, whether or not they agree with us on everything. Can we find a path forward that is the right one, the best one for all of us? And it's actually easier when you do a good job of listening to everyone and respecting diverse voices because you have more to draw on and more perspectives to engage with. But it makes for a lot of work if you're really serious about listening to as many Canadians as possible, and that's sort of the challenge of the job. The challenge I get on my life side is simple, that when you do that job, you don't have as much time to spend being a dad for my kids, for example. They're at their first night of circus school tonight. Yeah. If it wasn't something that I had wanted desperately to do as a kid, then I'd feel more I'm empathetic with them. I saw my 3-year-old juggling a feather, so I don't know. It's I don't get to be with them as often as I'd like, but at the same time, one of the things that I remember is that I'm not doing this job in spite of the fact that I have kids. I'm doing this job because I have kids, and I am very much focused on trying to build a better world for them and a better world for you, Pierce, as well. So thank you for the work you do as Prime Minister of your school, and I really appreciate your question. Merci. Question from over here. You in the front, in the pale sweater. Yes. Yeah, you.
This one?
Yes.
This one.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Mithila, and prior to asking my question, I just wanted to express my gratitude to you for all that you've done for the Tamil community here in Canada. Thanks to your father, who was also my favorite Prime Minister, and his efforts back in the 70s to spearhead a pro-multiculturalism immigration policy, and continuing on with your efforts today, which include officially naming this month as Tamil Heritage Month, my late uncle's prophetic words on Canada being a haven for my family of Sri Lankan Tamil refugees is a reality. So on behalf of him and my entire family, I would like to thank you and your entire family from the bottom of my heart for all that you've done for us. So as a follow-up, I just wanted to ask you how you think Canada can ensure accountability for the blatant human rights and women's rights abuses that occur in countries throughout the world like Sri Lanka. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Let me first start, and this may sound overly Canadian, to thank you for thanking me, but I also want to thank you and your family and your community and the communities of so many people who've come here to build better lives for demonstrating what my father believed in and what we now as Canadians know to be true, that immigration is a source of strength, that welcoming people who are fleeing for their lives, fleeing to build a better world for their kids, is an incredible source of strength and richness and opportunity for our country. And at a time where the world tends to be wondering about immigration and closing in a little bit in different places, the fact that Canadians continue to be positively inclined towards new Canadians and towards welcoming in people and giving them opportunities to continue to build this extraordinary country alongside the rest of us is really an extraordinary treasure, and it is in large part thanks to the incredibly successful waves of people coming from around the world and taking on this wonderful project alongside us. So thank you very much, and your family, for everything you've done. Canada is not the biggest country in the world. We're not the one with the biggest military. We're not the most economic powerhouse. But we're a country that has developed a capacity to lead by example, to call things as we see them and not just condemn, but work hard to improve and to support and to engage with countries that aren't as far along the human rights journey, the freedom journey, the respect journey that we are. And one of the first things we do is have to recognize where we continue to fall short, whether it's on the relationship with Indigenous peoples or whether it's the continued challenges we face, whether it's movements like Black Lives Matter or other movements that are calling out continued challenges we face within our institutions, within our communities. It's important that we recognize, first of all, that we have work to do in Canada, that we're not perfect, far from it, but recognizing that and working hard towards it gives us a capacity to weigh in constructive ways around the world. And on the issue of Sri Lanka, for example, we've been very active at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in terms of pushing for truth and reconciliation in Sri Lanka, recognition and holding to account for the crimes of the past decades, and ensuring that Canada can be not just a voice sort of standing across the oceans wagging their fingers, because that's not necessarily it can be very satisfying for the person who says, oh, you know, that's a terrible thing, and then moves on to something else. It's much harder to roll up your sleeves and try and be part of the solution, but I think that's something that we've seen time and time again Canadians have wanted for our country and wanted us to do, and there's always more to do, but we're going to continue to do that. So thank you very much for your question. Question from the back section over there. You in the aisle there. Yes, you. Stand up. Yeah, there you go.
Good afternoon, Mr. Trudeau. My name is Fahad Raymond. First and foremost, I just wanted to say thank you for you to coming here. I know it's not easy going on a tour like this and taking questions that, like you said, haven't been screened, so we all appreciate it. Thank you very much for what you're doing here today. My question to you, if you'd like. My question to you is about the emerging industry of artificial intelligence. China has recently invested $2 billion making an AI-only research city almost, and we're seeing it being adopted into every industry there is at a really rapid rate. It's far more relevant today than it was even when you had been elected. So my question is, what are Canada's plans to react to this, or rather take a proactive stance in this emerging industry rather than a reactive one, and also things that you might be considering in terms of the technology being misused, and et cetera, and just the challenges that will come with that?
Wow, this is a great question and extremely topical. First of all, I have to say, and I can't take credit for it, but I don't have to react to emerging AI trends, because Canada has actually been one of the countries that has led in the development of the latest area of AI, which is deep learning. You have AI in general, which is artificial intelligence, computers and machines mimicking human behavior. Then you have machine learning as a subset of that, which is machines that actually collect data, do experiments, either virtual or real, and learn from those solutions as to which solutions are going. But then you got a further step in there, pioneered particularly by Geoffrey Hinton, but Yoshua Bengio in Montreal and Rich Coleman in Edmonton have been extraordinary leaders on this in various aspects as well, which is more about mimicking a little bit the neural networks and the sort of black box approach that the human brain has, thinking about all sorts of different factors, weighting them differently, and figuring out ways forward. So Canada has already shown tremendous leadership. One of the things that we did last year was we launched an AI strategy investing well over $100 million specifically in AI research in Canada, and it's paying off as people from around the world are coming to study, to develop AI. We've got big American companies like Facebook and Google investing in Canadian researchers, not sucking them out of the country, but realizing that we have great hubs here as well that they want to be part of. And we've created a real positive model in Canada where, whereas formerly an AI researcher would have to sort of pick one of three paths. You could Just stay a pure academic and hope that someone takes your inventions or your theories and turns them into concrete practice. You could try and strike out on your own as an entrepreneur in small business and see if you could commercialize your ideas on your own, or you could let yourself be hired by or brought into the fold of a big company, an Apple or a Google, and hopefully move forward that way. Well, in Canada, we're going, instead of with A, with B, with C, we're going with D, which is a combination of all those things, understanding that giving flexibility in the way we move forward on AI is going to be really important. Now, artificial intelligence is something that's at use already in so many things that we use. When your phone recommends a song or a movie for you to see, that's a form of AI analyzing your viewing habits or listening habits and giving you recommendations. But there's so much more to come in the application of AI in just about every sphere of our lives that it becomes extremely important to make sure that, as you say, there is a thoughtful layer of analysis, of foresight put into what are the nefarious or negative potential consequences of AI, and how do we get around it? How do we create a legal or ethical framework around the positive use of AI? And I'm very pleased to say that Canadians are actually leading on that. In a country with a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, with a respect for diversity, with an understanding of how important it is to build strong, successful communities, that we be weighing in and in some ways leading the way on the kinds of ethical questions that go around AI, I think should be a reassurance to all of us. But it's certainly something that educational institutions, great ones like Western, Fanshawe College, and others all around the country are going to be leading the way on as well. So thank you very much. I already went too long on this one, but any chance I can get to geek out on this stuff, I will absolutely do it. Canada's a great place to be researching in this, and it's only going to get better. Thank you for your question. Question down here. You, sir, in the blue shirt.
Hi, I'm Brock Lavity. My question is about your haters. How do you deal with them?
Interesting. Well, I think it starts from a place of respect. Defending everyone's rights means defending everyone's rights to express themselves, whether or not you agree with them or not. So if someone has decided that they don't like me or they don't like certain policies, I will allow them. I will, actually more than allow them, it's up to me to allow them or not. I will try and listen to them respectfully and understand their point of view and where they're coming from. I am strong enough in my own principles and values and in my own evaluation of who I am, of where my strengths are, where my weaknesses are, that I don't really have to worry too much about feeling that I might be defined by what someone else thinks of me. And that's perhaps one of the advantages I got growing up in the family I did, where as a kid, when I was your age, I'd have people come up to me who'd tell me that they hated me just because their parents didn't like my father. And they didn't know me, they didn't know anything about me, but they really didn't like me. And that can be pretty hurtful until you learn to detach yourself from the fact that, well, they don't actually know you, and they might say that or think that, but it's not based on anything, so it can't affect me. But the flip side of it I had to learn as well was when people came up to me and because they liked my dad, tell me that I'm great and I'm fabulous and I'm awesome, I had to also learn how to put that aside because it was not based on them actually knowing me. So I developed a fairly strong sense of who I was. I gathered around me a great group of friends who liked me for who I was, however annoying I can be sometimes, like anyone can be. That's having a strong grounding in who I am allows me to be respectful towards people who are not positively inclined towards me, and at the same time try and listen in case they have a point that they're making that is worthwhile hearing and understanding, at least to understand that there are other viewpoints out there, even if ultimately I choose not to agree with them. Sorry, ma'am, yes, that's, sorry, ma'am, yes, ma'am, okay, yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am, I'm going to ask you to respect the people in this room. Ma'am, we're in a dialogue right here. Okay, ma'am, I'll let you, ma'am, I'm going to let you.
I am a ma'am. I am a suffragette. Do you know that this year is the 100th anniversary of women voting federally here? And what are you doing? You're bringing ISIS that had women...
Okay. No, please. Ma'am, this is not the spirit of dialogue. I was making my way around and I might have actually asked you to ask a question, but you don't seem to be listening to the spirit of dialogue. Yes, ma'am. Are you finished, ma'am? Thank you. I'm going to go back to this young man here because he was asking me a question. No, ma'am.
Really? Because you know what?
What's that, ma'am?
This whole staged event, you brought it in, it's in the brain. People can't get it. It's all university students. Why don't you go to a town hall where the regular folk can come and see you, Trudeau?
Okay, no, please. You know what? This is about...
critical discussion.
Okay, do you have one quick question? What's your one question?
I just asked you.
Yes. How do I feel about critical discussion? ISIS. Okay. Okay. Yeah. You know what, ma'am? You know what? You are taking time away from the people who have questions, who are willing to listen, and you are not. You've made yourself heard. Let's give this ma'am a round of applause, please, for her passion for her country, her willingness to stand up. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to take another question from over here now. How about you, sir, right in the middle with the glasses? Yes. I'll just make it difficult for the people bringing over mics. How's that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Trudeau.
Stay, ma'am. You're more than welcome to stay. Please let her stay if she wants to stay and listen. Would you like to, well, maybe someone else will answer the question when I call on them, because that's what we're doing politely and respectfully here, and I just asked the young man to do it. So please go have a seat, and you can stay and listen. Please stay and listen. Who knows, you might learn something from dialogue. Please have a seat. Please have a seat. Have a wonderful evening, ma'am, and thank you for your participation in this democratic exercise. See, one of the responsibilities that comes with free speech means listening to others' expressions as well, and that seems to be what some people have a difficult time with. They're good at shouting, they're not so good at listening. I apologize for that, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Trudeau. You mentioned the relations with our Indigenous peoples and reconciliation with them. And currently, many of our Indigenous people still live in communities that don't have full access to clean water. They live under water boil advisories. You've made at this point you want to get all those advisories gone. I'd like to know what is the government currently doing and what can it do in the future to rectify this issue?
Listen, great question. We made the commitment when we got elected to end all boil water advisories on reserve across this country within 5 years. It's something that we take very, very seriously and something we've started working on right away. Our Minister of Indigenous Services, Jane Philpott, who is right over here, is working very hard on this. And let me talk to you about why boil water advisories and drinking water is so important. First of all, obviously it's important because of itself, no Canadian should not be able to drink the water that comes from their tap, the water that's in their community. So we need to fix that, and we need to fix that as quickly as possible. One of the challenges, and we've already lifted about 23 drinking water advisories across the country, and one of the challenges with this is it's actually a challenge that is symptomatic of many other things. In order to have clean drinking water in a remote community, you need investments in infrastructure, you need investments in people to maintain and upkeep and keep that infrastructure going. You need opportunities to make sure that when the machines break down or when the plant breaks down, it's able to be replaced or it's able to be kept up. These are long-term problems that we are trying to solve once and for all, not just on a sporadic basis. That's why it is taking it's going to take probably the full 5 years to end all those drinking water advisories, even though we are working on them all simultaneously. There are real challenges around it, but you're absolutely right. It's a fundamental issue that we have to rectify. It's one that we are totally focused on, and it's one that we are going to deliver because of its symbolic and its practical importance in how we move forward on reconciliation. Thank you very much for your question. Question from over here, you ma'am in the glasses.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm a grade 10 student at Oak Ridge Secondary School. You have a younger daughter back at home. As she grows up and learns more about the world, what personal values do you wish to pass on to her as she prepares for a world where she will face gender barriers? Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your question. And yes, I want my daughter Ella, who's turning 9 in a few weeks, to not face the kind of systemic discrimination that has happened for far too long to women, that people fought for, that people are continuing to fight for, and I want to let her know that she can do anything, and she's already doing a really good job of proving that as she takes on amazing challenges. But it's not just about telling my daughter that she can do and be anything and she needs to be a strong and proud feminist. It's also about teaching my 2 sons, Xavier, who's 10, and Hadrian, who's 3.5, so maybe it's a little early for him, but not quite. Teach them to be feminists as well. Teach them that their sister should and would be able to do anything and should be paid every bit as much as men are for the same work. And that is something that we all have to work on as parents, as members of the community, as employees, as employers, how we shape the world around us to respect each other and to empower each other to succeed is going to be of fundamental importance. And it's something, like I said, it's not just about being good or doing the right thing. It just makes sense to make sure that everyone is able to contribute to their fullest potential in whatever position they aspire to and succeed at, and ensure that we have everyone contributing fully and barriers to no one's success. So that's why I'm a feminist, and that's how I'm raising my daughter and my sons. Thank you. Question, you in the green shirt.
Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Chiara Polillo. Thank you so much for being here, by the way. My question is, there is evidence to show that the Canadian government loses approximately $20 billion annually to tax loopholes such as the stock option deduction, the capital gains deduction, and the business entertainment expense deduction, benefiting almost exclusively the wealthiest individuals and corporations in the country. With issues in underfunding, such as within the foster care system and lack of access to clean water and health care in some Indigenous reservations, what is the Canadian government willing to do to abolish these loopholes and bring about positive change to the issues we face today?
Listen, thank you for that question. It's a great one, and it's a really important one, and it's actually part of what we heard regularly across the country as we were, as I was an MP and as we were campaigning for the 2015 election, which is why we made sure that our very first promise And the very first thing we did when we got elected and got into the House of Commons was to lower taxes on the middle class and raise them on the wealthiest 1%. Because making sure that everyone's paying their fair share and recognizing that the people who've been successful over the past years need to do a little bit more to support those people who need it is fundamental to building a better society. We also move forward on the Canada Child Benefit, which right here in London is helping 79,000 kids every year. What it does is we ended the previous government's approach of sending child benefit checks to families, even families that were very wealthy, by focusing it on the families who needed it most. So 9 out of 10 Canadian families who need it are getting tax-free money every month to help with the high costs of raising their kids. And that program is lifting hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty right across the country and making a real difference. We've also invested close to $1 billion in the Canada Revenue Agency to go after tax avoidance and tax evasion, both here and overseas. And we've identified close to $25 billion in tax monies that we're going to be able to go and get back in the coming years. So we are taking very seriously the principle of making sure that the system is fair for everyone. You may have heard a bit of a kerfuffle over the fall around small business taxes. We wanted to make sure that we could lower taxes for small businesses and have it benefit the hardworking small businesses that actually needed the help. Because the system we have, or the system we had, encouraged a small number of wealthy individuals to use small business private corporations as a way of paying lower tax rates than many middle-class Canadians, and we didn't think that was fair. So we made a change that means as of January 1st, all small businesses around the country are paying lower taxes, and it'll go down to 9% for the small business tax as of next January 1st. So everyone's benefiting from that, because we know small business is a hugely important driver of the economy and of jobs. But at the same time, we're making sure the system is fairer, so the wealthiest individuals aren't able to, or aren't encouraged to use the system as a way of paying lower tax rates. But there's always more to do, and we're very happy to take ideas and to look at more steps that we can do to ensure that our system is fair, that our system is balanced, and that the folks who need it are getting the help they need. And actually, one of the things that we're seeing with the job numbers we have the lowest unemployment rate nationally since we started collecting unemployment data. Over 40 years, since the Montreal Olympics, unemployment hasn't been as low as it is right now. We have the fastest growing economy in the G7, and this is one of those things where politicians stand up and say, oh, the economy's doing great, it's because of us. It's not because of us. What we did was we put a little more money in the pockets of the folks who need it, gave people a little more confidence in their own future, in their pensions, in their kids' future, started investing in the kinds of infrastructure and support that we know our communities need, and Canadians created those jobs. Canadians created that growth, so I have to say thank you to all of you, because you created the success we're going through right now. But there's always more to do. Thank you for that question. Yeah. Question right here. You, sir. Oh, no, sir. Sir in the front row. Yeah.
Oh, hello, Prime Minister. My daughter Valentina has a question.
What does true Canadian culture look like?
Wow. Come up with the tough questions, right? You know, every few years, and it's happened less and less recently, but every few years we go through this angst, or we used to go through this angst of what is a Canadian? Who is a typical Canadian? What does a Canadian look like or sound like? Or you know, how do we define a typical Canadian? And once you got past the easy thing of saying, well, we're not American, you can't define yourself through a negative, it became difficult to try and define what a typical Canadian was. And then we started to realize as a country that it is a strength to not define yourself through a typical nationality or a typical identity or a typical language, but through a collection of shared values. Values of openness, respect, compassion, willingness to work hard, a desire to be there for each other. And it doesn't matter what part of the world you're from, it doesn't matter what your background is. If you believe in working hard to build that success and respect your neighbors and understand that our diversity is a source of strength, you get to be Canadian. It doesn't matter where you're from. So if you can ascribe to these shared common values that many countries aspire to, but we tend to define ourselves by with the help of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that's what typical Canadian identity is. As for Canadian culture, well, Canadian culture celebrates Diwali. Canadian culture celebrates, the sugar shacks in Quebec. Canadian culture celebrates great West Coast art. Canadian culture is an assemblage of the creative expressions and identity of every single Canadian who wants to share and challenge their neighbors through art, through language, through discourse, through being good neighbors. There is no easy way to specify what Canadian culture might be, but we live multiple examples of it every day in every community in this country, and we are so much the better for it. Thank you very much for your question. Question. You, miss, in the back. Yes. Yeah.
Hi. Hi, Prime Minister. My name is Noor.
Pleasure to see you. Sorry, sir, I'm coming around there, sir. Okay, sir, this is a question of respect, sir, for everyone else here. People have put up their hands to ask questions. You don't seem to be listening to me. This is what public democracy looks like. People, don't panic. Sir, thank you very much for your questions. I might get to you, but right now we're going to respect this young lady who has her question right now. Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Go ahead with your question.
Hi.
Sorry, go ahead with your question. Sorry. Sorry, sir. I recommend you can take it up with your local MP, or maybe I'll call on you to ask a question when I get to you. But right now, this young lady has a question. So thank you, sir. Please. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi. Hi, Prime Minister. My name is Noor.
Okay, sorry. Please sit down, sir. You're being disrespectful to this young woman. You are being disrespectful to this woman. Thank you. Sorry, the microphone is for this young woman here. I'm terribly sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. My name is Noor, and I just wanted to say before I start that it's finally to see you face to face and actually just seeing you behind the screen.
Thank you.
Anyway, Canada accepted tens of thousands of skilled workers, and it was according to the list of professions that are needed in Canada. Highly educated people who are doctors and professors in their countries come to Canada every day, but aren't accepted to work in the jobs of their fields. They'd have to hide the fact that they are doctors or have PhDs just to get a simple job here in Canada. Is this really the land of immigrants and opportunities that these immigrants were promised? What happened to their skill sets, and why can't they apply in the Canadian society? So many skills and so many qualifications are wasted. What can you do as a Prime Minister to make Canada the place those hardworking and highly qualified immigrants were promised about? Thank you very much.
Oh no, thank you, Noor, for that question. In my riding of Papineau in Montreal, for years I've encountered this question as people come with tremendous skill sets from their home country and have difficulty finding work in their field, whether they're doctors. And if you think about it, I remember meeting a fellow who was a doctor from Algeria, and I know they need doctors in Algeria, more doctors, but he came to Canada, and we of course need more doctors here, but he wasn't working as a doctor here. And he certainly wasn't there in Algeria working as a doctor there. And it meant there was a net loss, because of Canada, of one doctor in the world in that particular example. And that's not the force for good that Canada wants to be. We need to do a much better job of recognizing skills and verifying those skills and allowing people to update or certify those skills as being able to succeed within the Canadian system. Obviously, different countries have different educational systems, different standards, and we have to make sure that in no case would anyone feel that, oh, just because I'm seeing a doctor who was an immigrant, they might not be as skilled as another doctor in Canada. We have to make sure that everyone's at the same level, but that's something that I know so many people are willing to do, willing to recertify, willing to demonstrate it, as long as it's not starting over from square one. It's something that the federal government is very much engaged in, and our Minister of Immigration, Ahmed Hussein, who's here today, is certainly active on the file. In many cases, however, when it comes to professional bodies or colleges, it goes through the provinces, and it actually counts on the specific guild or responsible professional community to make improvements on that. We are working very hard to encourage, to incite those changes. There's things that we can start doing while someone is waiting to come to Canada around language education, around certification, around getting their skills up to the level we need to go. We will expect through distance education even before they come to Canadian soil as immigrants. We need to do a lot more of that, not just because it's in our benefit, but we recognize that countries around the world are beginning to realize that immigration is an essential source of growth for the economy and opportunity for their countries, and we're going to be competing with people around the world for immigrants, and we need to make sure that we can show that people will be able to build that success and contribute to this country as quickly as possible. It's a real problem, and it's one that we are absolutely focused on. Thank you very much for your question. Someone from over here. How about, okay, you right there in the blue shirt. There we go. You had a cheerleader 2 seats over who was encouraging you, so it's all good.
Thank you, Prime Minister Trudeau. Someone brought up your father already. As a man who believed in reason before passion, what do you think your father would say about the current state of global discourse, where we find an increasingly more difficult time to sit down as peers and settle on a common set of facts before we decide on our feelings?
I think I see what you're getting at, but we have to make the right decisions for the future. We have to build on the opportunities we have, the responsibilities we have as countries, as representatives, as people who lead and serve their communities, and making decisions based on facts and evidence goes to the core of making good decisions. And we don't have to go overseas to take examples of that. One of the things we had to do when we came to government is restore funding for science and research, because we believe that evidence should inform policy, not policy inform evidence. It is tempting sometimes to listen to one side of the argument and not the other. It is tempting to try and cherry pick in facts and data how you want to move forward. It is tempting sometimes to play up emotions of division and fear to try and score political points. We've seen it. We saw it in the last election, and we see it in Canada still. We do see it around the world as well. the challenge that we have is always to expect more from our leaders, and for our leaders, quite frankly, to expect more of their citizens, of the people they serve. I truly believe that if you lay out a cogent argument based on facts, not everyone will agree with you, but they will at least understand why and where you come from and why you're making the choice you do. Governing is all about choosing. It's all about trying to find the best path forward into an uncertain future. But if you do it through listening to people, through respecting facts and evidence, you have a better chance of actually getting it right for future generations than if you're just doing it in a short-term, narrow frame. So that's why I believe in evidence-based policy. That's why my approach, whether it's on the international stage or here at home, is always to try and do things based on what the evidence tells me, what is responsible, and what people can, whether or not they agree with my final conclusions, understand my reasoning and be confident that we're doing it not just because of a whim or because of political pressures, but we're doing it because we believe it's the right kind of thing. And I think the more you treat citizens like intelligent deciders, people able to respect an argument and agree that there is justification to move forward, the better things are. The alternative is trying to scare people or emote people into voting one way or another. And ultimately, that can win elections, but it doesn't leave society or the country any better off. And I do have to believe that reason is going to win out over time, as long as it's dosed responsibly with a healthy degree of passion. Thank you. Question from up in the back. You, ma'am. Yes, with the grey hair.
Hello. Thank you for being here, to you and the Cabinet. My name's Lee MacArthur. I was really delighted and relieved when this government was elected. In large part, because of the promises that were made for electoral reform. We have a functioning democracy, and that democracy can always improve. There is opportunity here for this government to show incredible leadership in this portfolio, and I'm somewhat disappointed that we are not moving forward to make sure that every vote for every citizen in this country counts.
Thank you, Lee, for your question and your passion for the issue. I too believe that our democracy can be improved. Tinkering with democracy and changing the way we vote, changing the way we function as a democracy and as democratic institutions is an important thing. And it's something that you have to get right because it will fundamentally alter. Once you change something, sometimes it's really difficult to change it back if it ends up not being in the best interest of the country. And I, as I said a number of times, and I've said since, I do believe that it is possible to improve our electoral system. My preference was always to give citizens more choices on the ballot, so they're not forced to vote for the one that they dislike the least, or forced to vote against a party they don't want to get into power, but actually rank your choices 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6, depending on who you would be comfortable with, which would make sure that everyone elected in any given riding would have more than 50% of the support of the folks in the riding. That was my perception on this, but other people have different ideas on it. And we had a process that tried to draw out those different ideas and did a good job, and there was a number of strong ideas put forward. But ultimately, I had to make the decision, and it was my decision, I'm not blaming anyone else, that there was no way to move forward that would ensure a better outcome for Canadians. This was a call I had to make that was difficult, because I really did want this last election to be the last one held under the first past the post format. But I wasn't going to do something that I felt would harm Canada, would weaken our democracy, just to tick a box off on an electoral platform. My job is to do things that are good for the country. And when I saw that we were going down a road that I truly and deeply believe wasn't going to be good for the country, I put that promise aside. And I know that there are folks out there who are disappointed, but at the same time, the focus that we're taking as a government on things that touch the lives of Canadians, whether it's building an economy that works for everyone, whether it's investing in infrastructure, whether it's moving forward in a way that brings people together rather than divides them into subgroups. This is something that I remain passionate about. I understand that there are people who are disappointed about that, but ultimately my responsibility is to do things that are good for this country. And when I saw that the electoral reform was going in a direction that wasn't going to be good for this country, I put that promise aside. I'm sorry, Lee, that it disappointed you, but I will always do things that are in the best interest of the country. Thank you. You, ma'am, in the front in the white t-shirt. Yep, it's coming right there.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Trudeau. My name is Zion Michael. As of June 2017, the Government of Canada imposed restrictions regarding immigration policy on the island of Antigua and Barbuda. We now require visas to come to Canada. Many residents blame the Citizenship by Investment program, the argument being that it compromises national security and the integrity of our immigration system. My question is, what can be done to repair our relationship with Canada, and does it mean the termination of the CIP program?
Excellent question. I've met your Prime Minister, Gaston Brown, a few times at various events, including at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and we've had a few conversations about this. A number of Caribbean countries, including countries around the world, have realized that citizenship by investment is a source of revenue for countries that are otherwise challenged to get sources of revenue. So people can invest in that country and become citizens of that country, which a number of countries do around the world. We, however, have fairly stringent criteria in Canada around security, around ensuring that travelers who come to Canada are who they say they are. And we have pretty high expectations of countries that do not require visas to come to Canada. And what we found in Antigua and Barbuda and in other countries was there wasn't the level of stringency and analysis done to satisfy our high standards on immigration and border controls to allow us to continue to have visa-free access for citizens of Antigua and Barbuda. So we are happy to work with countries like Antigua to improve, to have them improve their system so it meets Canada's high standards, but we will not compromise Canadian safety or our border security on the basis of trying to do a favor for another friendly country. We will always ensure that Canadians stay protected, and if countries like Antigua and Barbuda make the significant improvements and changes necessary to their program, we could then look at lifting the visa requirements. I'm just not going to compromise Canadian security on an issue like this or on any issue. But thank you very much for your question. You in the middle. Yes. Yes. Oh, sorry, sir. Go ahead, miss. Okay, sir, thank you. Sorry, sir. I'm actually very pleased with the choices we've made on the Supreme Court recently. We have an outstanding court. Thank you, sir. I think you've demonstrated that you're disrupting the process here and getting in the way of the good people of London who came out to have a dialogue on politics. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. My name is Ariana. My question is about the Muskrat Falls Hydroelectric Dam in Labrador, which is a project that has been over $7 billion, and it has been in...
Sorry about this. It's what it's like in the House of Commons sometimes, too.
So this hydroelectric dam project is part of the move towards clean energy. But my question is that Muskrat Falls threatens the water safety of the Lake Melville because of methyl mercury, which is a bioaccumulant which, as it goes up the food chain, makes the food that Indigenous communities survive on extremely poisonous.
Sorry. Sir, if you stop shouting, you could stay. Will you stop shouting, sir? Then you won't be disturbing everyone here? Guess not. Okay. Have a lovely evening, sir. Thank you for coming out in this exercise in democracy. It's not pretty, but it's the best system we have. Democracy's pretty good. I apologize. I was listening intently.
I'm just going to kind of so the hydroelectric dams are a move towards this promise for clean and renewable energy. But currently, 90% of the proposed hydroelectric dams border in Canadian-defined Indigenous land, because as we know, all land is Indigenous land. Now, my question is, how does your government rectify or reconcile the idea of clean energy when it disproportionately affects Indigenous communities who live and survive off of fish and hunting, as well as their cultural practices? And that doesn't, to me, seem like we are putting the interests of Indigenous communities ahead of, say, economic benefits of energy projects.
No, thank you for your question. It's a very good one, and it goes to the heart of one of the challenges, one of the greatest challenges that we face as a country, which is how to reconcile protecting the environment, growing the economy, and respecting the rights of the Indigenous peoples who've been here for millennia. Respecting the original treaties and the original relationships is absolutely essential. And we need to move forward in a way that is respectful and collaborative. On the Muskrat Falls Dam specifically, there has been significant science done. We are working with the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, that is the proponent of this project, to ensure that the relationship with Indigenous peoples, that ensuring that there are no or minimal impacts on Indigenous communities, on the communities around that, is extremely important. It's part of a larger question that we always face. How do we make sure we are giving opportunities and support to all Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, as we move forward, while at the same time ensuring that we are protecting the environment for future generations? Because it's not a choice between the environment or the economy. We have to do them both together. We know that you can't do something that is bad for the environment but good for the economy and actually be good for the economy unless you look at it in such a narrow and short-term time frame as to be pretty much useless. If you want to be good for the economy, we need to continue to protect and preserve the ecosystem services, the natural world that is the source of so much of what we take for granted. And basing ourselves on science, on responsible studies, and on consultation and collaboration with Indigenous peoples as we move forward in ways that hopefully give benefits for everyone is the great challenge of our time. I have worked with the government of Newfoundland and Labrador and respect their decision to move forward on this hydroelectric dam. But at the same time, we are ensuring that the highest caliber of science and relationship with Indigenous peoples remains at the heart of every step as we go forward. Thank you very much for your question. Sir, did you have a question? Please. Let's get him a microphone. You've been very patient. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister, and thank you for taking my question. I think it's appropriate that we kind of done the full circle and we've come around here at the end so that I can put this in a proper context. First of all, I think I'm one of the dumbest people sitting in this room based on the questions from these young people. I'm amazed at that. So that
Our future's in good hands, isn't it?
Thing.
Yes. Thank you.
But the reason I stood, Prime Minister, when the questions were talked about Indigenous people, I wanted you to remember that you're speaking about us and to keep that in mind. You don't speak over us. So I don't say that to offend you, Mr. Prime Minister. I just say that as to why I stood. I want you to always remind that when you talk about the First Peoples here, that we're here and we need that voice. I want to also commend you in terms of your stance and your bravery. Is that a word? Courage. Your courage to attack and address this First Nations issue. It's been long-standing in this country, and we need some leadership in terms of moving this forward. I applaud your move in terms of setting out this division with respect to working on relationships. But I also applaud your notion to not forget that we've got day-to-day issues. Each one of these questions that these young people and these people in this room asked you impacts and hits our First Nations communities, every one of them. We're talking about IT, you know what I mean? We have intellectual property rights as First Nations that we need to share on the environment, on the economy, employment and training. You talked about growth for the country. I want to remind you that our communities need that growth too. You talked about infrastructure for the country. I want to remind you that our communities need that infrastructure too. You talked about education at the highest level, at the lowest level. Education is lifelong learning. We need that for our communities too. I stand here, Prime Minister, as somebody that has been the benefit of all of that sits out here in our society. And I say that to you with as much respect as I can. But I also stand here representing people that have not had that opportunity that what you talk about that exists in this country. And that will not have that opportunity unless there's some serious investments made and some serious movement made by your leadership, your government as it stands right now, and your guidance in terms of helping, telling the people of Canada to help us. We need to change that idea. We need some help. We've got people at home that are ready to work, that are ready to learn, that are ready to participate, but we can't because the barriers still exist, Prime Minister. I want to thank you for taking my question because we haven't yet seen any significant change at home. We've heard change. But I also want to take this time too and do this, maybe just roll up on this last one because it's key. I've been in this business for a very long time, Prime Minister. I remember your father too, but anyways, we had difference of opinions with respect to your father's policies. So it's ironic that you're here and trying to change that. It's, I don't know if that's caught on many people here in Canada, but it's certainly something that I understand. The issue in terms of dealing with Indigenous peoples, Aboriginal issues, does not rely on one minister. Does not rely on two ministers. It relies on your cabinet. The First Nations people in this country started something called as Idle No More. And what it was a movement that said that our leadership is not being listened to. And so we'll take it to the streets, and the people did that. They did that in a non-violent way. We got the attention of Canadians, and it worked. And I don't want to cede all the efforts of those people that are affected on things day to day, Minister. Not like you and I. We share the benefits of all the years that we've done. But I want to say that in our community, the Oneida Nation of the Thames is a unique community, a unique community in a lot of ways, and we're ready for this advancement. We're ready to participate. We're ready to take our place alongside the rest of Canadians here. But we want that respect, and we want that understanding that we can't do it without your help. Not just the ministers of Indian Affairs, not just the minister of that side, but all of them. We have disability issues. We have employment and training issues. We have science people that want to do that, Prime Minister. So my question here is to you is, how are you going to continue to encourage the government, the opposition, and the Canadian leadership, both be it economic and be it social, to help us in our movement forward?
Thank you. Miigwech, for your words and for your leadership. Thank you. Sorry, the other ones. But thank you. When we formed government a little over 2 years ago, one of the things that was very, very clear, and one of the things that was very exciting, was that Canadians gave us a very clear mandate to move forward on something that governments had failed at in the past, of actually changing and improving the fundamental relationship between Canada and the Indigenous peoples of this land. This is something that wasn't just the job for the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs. It was something that I put in the mandate letters, which you can see online, of every single minister, whether it's Agriculture or Veterans Affairs or Minister of Finance or Minister of Status of Women. Every single minister in our government got told that working on reconciliation and a nation-to-nation relationship is their responsibility as well. One of the things we did more recently is we realized that we had, as a country, pushed the creaky colonial structures of Indigenous affairs as a ministry about as far as they were going to go. And we needed to separate that ministry into two parts. One, the Ministry of Department of Indigenous Crown Relations, which will always exist, which will be the way that the federal government works with Indigenous peoples in this country to ensure that treaty rights are respected, that partnership is made, that opportunities are there for these communities and their citizens to expand and thrive and grow and have all the opportunities that everyone does across this country. And another ministry that we recognize should be disappearing in a few years, or maybe a few decades. And that's the Ministry of Indigenous Services. I don't think it's right that Indigenous communities should depend on the federal government to deliver their services. I think services to Indigenous communities should be defined and delivered and directed and empowered by Indigenous communities themselves. But we recognize that the damage and the trauma and the marginalization and the harm done for generations by Canada to Indigenous peoples will take time to heal. And that's why we work with Indigenous communities at their pace, at your pace, to take on that leadership, to define your path forward with support and funding as you need it from the federal government. This is a long, slow process, and I'm impatient, and Indigenous communities are impatient. We're all impatient, but we also know that we have to work very, very hard to get this right. And no matter how much we might have a great idea or a great solution in Ottawa that we think could fix it, the solutions can't come from Ottawa. That's part of the colonial thinking that led us to where we are now. The solutions have to come from your leadership, from your members, from your activists, and those are the folks that we are willing to work with and support and help as we move forward. There is need for capacity building, but there is also need, as you rightly pointed out, for immediate help right now on boil water advisories is one of the examples, on making sure that we're closing the gap between what we invest in non-Indigenous students every year and what we invest in Indigenous students. Making sure that everyone has the same opportunities for a great education, for a great job, a great career. Making sure that we undo one of the greatest damages of residential schools, and Chief Henry talked about it earlier, the need to celebrate language and culture. Understanding that language and culture is core to identity and to how we view ourselves. And I'm a Quebecer, so I know that French Canadians in Canada thrived and were able to survive and resist assimilation because we upheld and strengthened and defended our language and our culture. And in Indigenous communities, through residential schools, generations were told not to speak their language, not to celebrate their culture. We're told that they were wrong in their traditions, in their identity. And that left a level of intergenerational trauma that we can only begin to comprehend. And that's where the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission over the past years was so important. You know, I heard this stat from former Prime Minister Paul Martin a few years ago. We know, for example, that in Indigenous communities, the rate of youth suicide is many, many times higher than in non-Indigenous communities across this country. But even within Indigenous communities, there is a significant variance. And in communities where they are able to lift up language and culture and share it and create pride in traditions and identity, the youth suicide rate decreases massively. Celebrating language and culture is something that we need to do, and our Minister of Heritage, Mélanie Joly, here is working very, very hard on a program to strengthen Indigenous languages and cultures. But we're doing it in partnership with the AFN, with the Métis Nation, with the ITK. We know that the solution will be something that we have to work on for longer than I'll be Prime Minister. But I also know that the path we are beginning to walk together in respect, in openness, and with a tremendous level of interest, support, and enthusiasm from non-Indigenous Canadians makes it possible that we will put an end to what has been Canada's greatest failing for far too long. I think it is, as we reach 9 o'clock, an appropriate thing to have ended on this particular question. I thank you both for that. I will give Chief Henry, who opened it up, the last word as we conclude tonight. But I thank you very, very much for being here. Chief Henry, let's just get a mic to... One more mic. Here we go. Just hang on for a sec, folks.
1 second, please. I just wanted to say that I'm honored that you're here tonight. And my nation, Chippewas, the Thames First Nation, believes you when you say that your relationship to Indigenous peoples is so important to you. I watched you when you were there when Gord Downey accepted his eagle feather in his name. We cried along with you when you did those things, and you were there. When you walked into the FN meeting for the first time after you were elected, we were honored to have you come and be there as a Prime Minister. So my nation, Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, and we just live little ways from here, want to honor you. We want to say thank you very much for all you're doing, but we know that you don't have all the answers. We know that we can support you with some of the questions that we're asking, and we need to rekindle that relationship because we can help each other as partners in this country. Native people and you and everybody that comes to live here can live a good life if we decide we want to. So tonight, in this moment, I'd like to do what happened to Gord Downey. He was given an eagle feather because he was such a tremendous leader, and you're a tremendous leader, Prime Minister, and I'd like to offer you this eagle feather, which is one of our highest honors.
Thank you, Chief Miigwech. Chief Miigwech. Thank you very much, London. It was wonderful to see you all again. Merci beaucoup, mes amis. Thank you.